Hello there, it's the 4th of March. Today I've got a piece by A.G. Street, a piece of prose from his book, one of his books, A Year in My Life. This is called Spring. I had intended to start these small sections that start each quarter of the book in September at Michaelmas, which is the beginning of the farming year, but I failed to find it until this point. The reason I've chosen to do it now is because it seems to me that spring started here on the 16th of February. That's the first day that felt spring-like, and actually it's held fairly well so far. So that's over a fortnight ago. So that's a good sign. Spring does vary in its position, hence this. Spring. I must confess that at the moment I am a trifle disappointed with some of my friends and neighbours. Today, the last day of January to be exact, was so lovely that I went for a long lazy ride over my farm and the surrounding countryside, and without exception everybody I met remarked on the glory of the morning and added, "It's just like spring." Being Wiltshire born, most of them said "gist" instead of "just", and the majority made gloomy prophecies to the effect that later on we should suffer for such unseasonable weather. I prefer the dialect rendering, and I have no cause to doubt the truth of their pessimistic forecasts, but I do appreciate the suggestion that spring must come at a certain date in the man-made calendar. Just when, forsooth, is spring, or, perhaps more grammatically, when should spring be? True, my encyclopedia informs me that in these parts spring arrives with the vernal equinox, about March the 20th, and gives place to summer at the solstice on the 21st of June. Such rigid boundaries may be all very well for townsfolk, but surely those of us who live year after year in intimate contact with the bounty of the four seasons should know that spring comes short, sometimes early and sometimes late, sometimes for a short visit and sometimes for a long stay. We of all people should have said today, not "it's just like spring", but "nice to greet spring again, isn't it?" For years on my farm we dated spring by the appearance of Tubby Bell, a local worthy who reached his allotted span several years ago, and who for 30 years or so was to me and my neighbours the herald of spring. As I absorbed the legend in my boyhood, one winter Tubby was taken ill, a serious calamity for a working man in the days when there was no health insurance money to keep the pot boiling. However, the bounty of his employer and the kindness and charity of his friends and well-meaning neighbours enabled Tubby to enjoy his illness tremendously. During this halcyon period of his existence, he became even more Tubby, and moreover, according to local gossip, less inclined to work. One or two harsh critics nearby swore that there was nothing the matter with him save laziness, but Tubby ignored such jealous jibes and stayed warm and cosy in the innermost fastness of his thatched cottage all the winter. Then one fine day in spring, Tubby suddenly appeared at the door of his cottage and sat on a chair blinking at the warm sunshine. Spring had brought on convalescence. And through the summer Tubby's health improved slowly, but not sufficiently to warrant his returning to work. Why should he work, and perhaps do some other poor fellow out of a job, when from divers charitable sources sufficient maintenance was forthcoming? But when in early October winter first blew his frosty breath on the little windows of his house, Tubby had a relapse and retired indoors to bed. For months he hibernated, and not until spring returned once more to gladden the countryside did Tubby appear in his chair at the door of his cottage. This procedure became a legend as the years passed, and I can remember as a schoolboy hearing the head dairyman shout to his mate across the yard, "Bill, spring's come, there's no Tubby's out." For 20 years or so we left it to Tubby to tell us when spring had really arrived, and never once did he give us false information. He was not concerned with official dates. His first appearance might be as early as February or delayed until May. Not until the world had been warmed to suit one of his delicate constitution did he venture forth. Poor Tubby, Somehow I liked him, and after a few years even those stern critics of laziness, his fellow workmen, began to appreciate his qualities, and perhaps to admire his marvellous feat of living in comfort without either work, wealth, or worry. Now he has left us. I'm sorry to find that my neighbours are dating spring by the calendar which is printed in town. I refuse to copy them, and shall continue to look out for spring as soon as Christmas is over. What matter if her early visits are but short ones, and that although she was here this morning, tomorrow may see winter ruling the countryside once again. Today, spring greeted me on the downs and in the valley. Today, spring hatched out gnats around my head. Today, spring warmed the back of my neck. Sufficient for today was the goodness thereof. So there is quite a lot to be said in that, and I would recommend those who are interested in farming and the countryside in general, his books are well worth a read. A.G. Street. Bye for now.